Today we have a very spooky episode planned for you. We will be analyzing 4 Halloween movies and telling you were they good acts of self-defense. Welcome to the first ever AOR Halloween special. Hello everyone, my name is attorney Rachel Moss and I'm here with attorneys Emma Wittmann and Brittany LaBerry. We are so excited to dive into this very special episode. We have 4 Halloween clips queued up for you. It's a little different than what we normally do here, but we thought why not get in the spirit. Before we analyze those clips, we want to go over again the principles of self-defense. So we've talked a lot about self-defense on this channel, but there's a few things that never hurt to be reminded of. Emma, how about you take us away?
Yeah, so we're going to be looking at these clips, and what we want you to look for along with us is this good self-defense? So a couple things we're always taking a look at is there proportion? Is it justified? Would a reasonable person in that position feel that there is an imminent threat where they are justified to use proportional force to protect themselves? We're also going to be looking at defense of others. Brittany, do you want to give a little deep dive on that?
Yeah, absolutely. All the same factors apply for defense of third parties. It's the same type of analysis that we're doing. It's just if that one person is justified in using that force to protect the third party.
Perfect.
And there's also a few other things we look for. There's times where it's pretty obvious to us that it won't be self-defense. Those times are where, let's say there was just a verbal threat the person was facing. That's a clear case of it not being self-defense. Another time where it's not going to be self-defense is if you were the person provoking the fight. However, there are exceptions to that as well. So we'll break it all down a little bit more as we watch the videos, but we just wanted to cue you in on those few things before we dive in. The first video we're going to look at today is from The Shining. So everyone knows The Shining, a very iconic movie. This is your one chance here. If you haven't watched The Shining, you have your spoiler warning right here. We're going to be revealing a big clip from the movie. So this is your chance to click away or fast forward during the video. But what you're going to see here is a clip where the main character, Jack, is attempting to break into a door that his wife is behind. So in this film, Jack has gone crazy and is trying to break into this door. So let's watch the clip.
Not by the hair on your chinny chin chin. Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in. Here's Johnny.
So as we see in that clip, Jack successfully uses an axe to break through the door, and then only after he breaks through the door, he starts to reach for the door handle, and then his wife, Wendy, reaches out with her knife, slashes him on the hand when he's no longer holding the axe. So I think most people can look at this clip and have that first impression of that this is a pretty solid case of self-defense. At this point, Wendy has already been threatened by Jack. He's already expressed to her that he plans on killing her, and then there's evidence that he is following through. He's breaking in to the bathroom she's hiding in with an axe. However, the one thing that gives me pause about this specific video is he sets the axe down and then he starts to open the door, and that's when she slashes. I still think it's a good case of self-defense, but I wanted to hear your thoughts as well.
Yes, so the imminency is super imminent in this clip, right? I mean, he's right there with an axe. An axe is definitely a deadly weapon. But I would argue that maybe she doesn't know that he put down the axe, right? Mm-hmm. So he can hold the axe in one hand and then, try and open up the door in the other. So I would say based on the viewer and the movie, we know that he put it down, but I don't know if she knew. I really don't. So I would say this is a good, clean act of self-defense, especially because the force that she used was proportionate. I mean, he was using an axe, right? It wasn't just words. It wasn't that I'm going to kill you. It was I'm going to kill you and then I'm going to follow through with some action. So I believe this is good self-defense, even though he did put down the axe.
And this is where reasonable person standards coming into play as well. So she has to be looked at. What was everything that she knew at that point in time? We didn't show it in this clip, but we know he's already broken through one door. I don't think the clip quite captured it, but on the front of that door, it was written in red, the red rum, murder spelled backwards. So there's all these cues of what his intent is and what he's trying to do beyond just the axe. And as far as you were saying, you're absolutely right. She has no way of knowing what else is behind the door with him. Could he have another weapon on him somewhere? Obviously, all we saw was his face kind of pressed up against, looking in. So she has no idea, but based on all of those indications, I definitely think a reasonable person in her shoes would feel that there is a deadly threat that is absolutely imminent, and she's completely justified.
Especially because he still had the axe in his, grabbing area. So just because even if she knew that he put it down, if he opened up the door, what was he going to do? Probably grab that axe when he got into the door.
Exactly. And I think another important thing is she doesn't have to wait for him to successfully break in for her to take action. It's kind of like when we talk about the crime prevention statute when there's a break into a home. You don't have to wait to stop a burglar until they're actually inside your residence. If you see them messing with your door, you can take action then, depending on the state you're in. And in the same way, she doesn't have to wait for him to actually open the door for her to wait to then use her weapon to defend herself. So here it's a pretty clear case of self-defense, but I think it shows that, again, that self-defense is not always with a firearm. Here we have a good example where it's with a knife. And, with Attorneys on Retainer, I always like to brag about our program. With Attorneys on Retainer, we cover instances of self-defense like this where it'd be with a knife, not just firearms.
Absolutely. Let's go to the next clip.
All right, so our next clip is from the movie Halloween. It's definitely an older movie. You've all heard of Michael Myers, so let's watch the clip and we'll dive into it. So a little bit of backstory for anyone who hasn't seen this movie. I'll try not to give too many spoilers, but just so you know who the characters are. The man in the mask is going to be Michael Myers. His backstory in this movie is that during childhood, he was convicted of killing his sister and was placed in a mental facility where he has stayed for many years. The doctor is going to be the man you see enter the home after the screaming children run out. And so what had happened is Michael Myers escaped from the mental facility and was on the loose, and without giving it all away in case you haven't somehow seen this movie yet, commits several different crimes along the way while they're trying to find him and get him back to the facility. So that man that comes into the home is his doctor that's trying to hunt him down and take him back into custody. The woman who is seen being attacked by Michael Myers is Lori. She's a young woman who babysits for individuals in the neighborhood, and he has been following her and a couple of her friends around throughout the day leading up until this point. So let's dive in. This one definitely seems to be a clear self-defense, but this is where we're getting into the defense of others. What are your guys' initial impressions from watching this clip?
So looking at this, it is a clear case of defense of others. I think this man had enough information to step in and act in her defense, because the standard for defense of others that we look for is if that person puts himself in the shoes of the victim, would that person be entitled to use self-defense? And so here we can see Lori, the main character, would definitely have been entitled to use self-defense. Here was a man much larger than her that was definitely capable of inflicting deadly physical force upon her. In fact, I think we saw him strangling her there, impeding her airway. That is enough to cause serious physical injury or death. So that man was definitely justified in stepping in and using force, including deadly physical force, to stop Michael Myers' use of deadly physical force. I did have one problem with this video, though, and I think this is an on-the-line case because I think that first shot completely justified, no question. But what was tough is after that second shot, it seemed like Michael Myers wasn't really doing anything anymore. It seemed like multiple seconds passed while he was just standing there. What I think makes this tricky is that he wasn't retreating, Michael Myers wasn't running away, but he also wasn't continuing to attack. So I wanted to hear your thoughts. Do you think that pause was enough where the doctor was no longer justified in adding those additional shots? Or was it still reasonable for him to continue exercising force?
Yeah, I think this is a little tricky, like you said. The first shot completely justified. The second shot, because he didn't fall to the ground, I do think that was still, we can argue, justified. Up until that point, the third, the fourth, the fifth, I do think that it could look poor to the state, right? But we always have an argument, right, that they used force. They were, in that fear state. The adrenaline was, jumping. They were in a house alone. When this was made, they didn't have cell phones, right? Stuff like that. And so I think that we, of course, have an argument.
Yeah, and as defense attorneys, we know that in most situations, we're never going to get a perfect self-defense situation. There's always going to be things that may give us pause. But in this case, I do think we can still argue self-defense. Is it perfect? No. Is it still imminent? Yes. And I think based on the totality of the circumstances and the events that have led up to this moment in this movie, where there's been several other attacks and assaults and murders in a series on this day, and he is not retreating back at that point. He hasn't fallen to the ground. I think we definitely still have an argument that additional shots were justified. But I absolutely agree that in a perfect situation, you only fire the shot or shots that are needed to stop the immediate threat. You do not err on the side of unloading the entire magazine if it's not necessary.
I think you make a great point, though, about what does the person using the force know at that point, right? The facts that you know, the context that you know about the person or their propensity for danger, dangerousness, stuff like that really does matter, right? Those are the facts. And we say every case is all about the facts. So, we really have to dive deep in the facts.
Yeah, and I think this is why we always say reasonableness is a question for the jury. It really is at the end of the day. The state can make their best case. We as defense attorneys can make our best case. But at the end of the day, the jury is the one that gets to decide reasonableness. And this is why we can never say 100% for sure, even, on what we think is a clear case, even going back to that first Shining clip. There's a jury out there that might find that unreasonable. I think that's a bad jury, but they could be out there. In the same way here, this is something that I could see going either way in front of a jury, where they could say, yeah, that first shot, that's reasonable. There was an imminent danger to Lori's life. The force was proportionate. He was justified in acting in defense of others. But those second and third shots, were they reasonable? Was the threat still imminent to the danger that Lori was facing? I don't know. So this is one where, as a defense attorney, I want to say a good shoot, but I personally think those last couple shots, I think enough time passed where Michael Myers wasn't really doing anything, where it could be a bad shoot. So that brings us to our next clip. We're going to be watching a clip from one of my favorite movies, The Karate Kid. So if you haven't seen The Karate Kid, it's basically a really classic martial arts movie where there's this war with karate in the valley. So we have this boy, Daniel, that's getting bullied in school by a group of kids. Johnny is their ringleader. And so Daniel and Johnny have been going back and forth in school. And on this Halloween night, they're having a little Halloween party at the school. Daniel finally decides to strike back and prank Johnny. So what you're going to see here is the aftermath post-prank, where Johnny starts chasing Daniel after Daniel has pranked him.
Danger! Everywhere I turn, no shelter, and the truth is gonna burn. There ain't no looking back. You put it all behind when you're running out of time.
You little wimp! You couldn't leave well enough alone. Could you, little twerp? No, you had to push it. Well, now you're gonna pay.
Where are you going, sweetheart?
How about a front kick, Johnny? Get him out. Hey, leave him alone, man. He's had enough. Shut up, Bobby. Look at his guts. He can't even stand up. So what? That don't mean squat. Johnny, leave him alone, man. He's had enough. Throw the side when he's had enough, man. What is wrong with you, Johnny? An enemy deserves no mercy. Right, right, right. You're crazy, man. Yeah. Johnny, Bobby, get him. Get him.
So that's awesome, first of all. I love it to see Mr. Miyagi, an old man, just taking down all these like really in shape punk kids. Thank you, Mr. Miyagi. So I'm going to start off by saying, again, I think we have another good case of self-defense here, another good case of defense of others. However, there are a few wrinkles I think we should analyze. The first one being the fight starts with Johnny chasing Daniel after Daniel has pranked him. And so the question is, Daniel did use some force against Johnny in the prank. He basically poured some water on him. I think the first thing we can really analyze here is the fact that just because someone uses force against you doesn't mean that you then get to retaliate with force if that person is no longer an imminent threat to you. So in this clip, we can see Daniel from the beginning of the clip is running away from Johnny and his friends. Daniel is no longer an imminent threat to Johnny. He's no longer exercising force against him, and Daniel has fully retreated. So I think the first thing we can confidently say here is that Johnny is not entitled to be using any force against Daniel.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. At that point, once he's running away, the threat has now ended and it could have just been left alone. But of course, he still chooses to engage in the chase. And so now there is a new threat and the kind of tides have shifted, if you will.
Exactly. When you love karate that much, sometimes it's hard to let a fight go. So then Johnny is chasing Daniel. And then that's when we see Johnny and his gang gather around Daniel as Daniel fails to crawl over that fence. That's why strength training is important, guys. Daniel doesn't make it over the fence. Johnny starts kind of beating him up with his gang. And at that point, Daniel would have been entitled to self-defense. However, it looks like he wasn't capable of using it in that situation. I think something important to point out here is even though you could argue Daniel in a way was the initial aggressor, he used some force against Johnny. Johnny then followed. But once Daniel made that attempt to retreat and then Johnny reinitiated force, Daniel would then be allowed to then act in self-defense here. So we now know that anyone else stepping in, like Mr. Miyagi, would be entitled to act as defense of others.
Yes, and so imminency, we talk about imminency. Obviously, it was imminent. He was completely getting beat up, right, for lack of a better word, with multiple people, right? Higher threat. And also, Mr. Miyagi jumped over the fence and used proportionate force, right? He didn't, use too much force. He put them in a situation where they backed off of him.
Yeah, exactly, because Mr. Miyagi didn't just whip out a gun and start shooting these kids. He used proportional force. He matched their karate with his own more superior karate and took down all the kids.
I can definitely tell who you like more in the movie.
Actually, I love Cobra Kai, the TV show, so I'm kind of a Johnny Lawrence fan myself. But I can't deny that Mr. Miyagi really showed out here. He did a great job, and it was proportional. I did find it interesting. There was that one friend, if you noticed, that started to discourage Johnny from fighting Daniel. Mm-hmm. He was saying, no, don't finish him off. Like, it's been enough. And then Johnny continued to exercise force. I noticed Mr. Miyagi, when he hopped down, he did end up fighting that kid, but I noticed that kid kind of had a change of heart where he started to come at Mr. Miyagi. And I think another important thing that Mr. Miyagi did here is that he didn't just start beating up each kid right away. He waited for each kid to come at him. If you noticed, every single person before he fought them first lunged at Mr. Miyagi.
Yeah, and that's one thing we haven't talked about yet. In the first two clips, it was more of a one-on-one situation. Here, it is one kid against a group that's coming after him. So having the ability to defend himself was going to be difficult against multiple individuals. So having someone like Mr. Miyagi who can come in as a third party and do defense of others to protect him was really important.
Definitely. What do you think if Mr. Miyagi had tried to act with deadly physical force, do you think it would have been justified here?
I think there would have definitely been a proportionality issue because right now it doesn't look like anyone has any type of weapons on them. So if he came in and started shooting, could that have been excessive force? I think there's definitely a good argument for that. Right now, looking at this clip, with it just being one-on-one, only using karate, we have proportionality. There's no issues there. If he came in with a firearm when no one else had a firearm, would have made for a more difficult case.
Yeah, and his expertise in karate, I think, really supports the argument that it would not be proportionate to use deadly physical force because he can obviously stop that threat without the need of that, right? Like we talked about with Mike Myers, where he was a bigger, man, and we often talk woman versus man. Men are biologically usually more stronger than women, right? And so that's always kind of in that proportionality analysis as well. So I think that his skill set, being able to take people down with karate very easily for him is definitely in that analysis, and I would think that using deadly physical force like a firearm in this case would be disproportionate.
So Mr. Miyagi, we approve of your use of defense of others here. And remember, AOR members, if you're involved in a self-defense incident using karate, we have your back. And I think that brings us to our first Halloween safety tip of the day. We have a couple more coming, so stay tuned to the end of the episode. Our first one here is be mindful of pranks and scaring other people on Halloween. Here, Daniel took the opportunity to pull a prank on one of his classmates and look at how it ended up. In a situation like this, we determined that there was no justification for Johnny to go chase after Daniel and beat him up. Maybe Johnny would have been justified in reporting the incident to an authority saying, Daniel assaulted me, but he wasn't justified in going and following him and beating him up. However, there are many incidents we see on Halloween where people pull dangerous pranks or jump out at people to scare them in a bad timing situation, and it can end in disaster, frankly. So I don't want to discourage people from having fun on Halloween. I love the trick part of trick or treat, but just be mindful of that, because if you do it in a certain way where it can be perceived as a reasonable threat to someone's life, that person could then be justified in using force against you.
Absolutely.
That also ties into mistake of fact, right? So we have something called mistake of fact where even if you thought something, if a reasonable person would think that, even if it was a mistake, then that's taken into account with your actions, right? So let's just say I thought that you had a firearm, but I had articulable facts to think that, even if I was wrong, that's part of the analysis of whether or not I acted reasonable. So pranks and stuff like that definitely tie into mistake of fact as well.
So stay tuned to the end of the episode. We have another cool Halloween safety tip coming up about toy or prop guns. But we have one more clip left for you.
The next movie clip we're going to analyze is The Joker. So backstory on The Joker, if anybody's not seen it, it's a 2019 version, but there is a main character named Arthur Fleck. Arthur Fleck is a professional clown and aspiring comedian. He does have a neurological disorder where he breaks out into intense laughter, and that often gets him in trouble, or people think he's a little creepy because of that. So in this movie, earlier in the movie before this scene, what happens is he is actually beaten up on the street while he's performing his clown routine, and his coworker says, "Hey, here's a revolver for you in the future." He then later in the movie is in a hospital with kids, and the revolver actually falls out of his belongings, and then he's fired. He's still in that clown painting or mask when he is in this scene, so he leaves the hospital, gets on the train, is going to go home, and that's where the scene begins. Now, I think it's important to kind of, jump in that it's not a part of this analysis, but make sure to be a responsible gun owner. Don't allow your firearm to fall out of your belongings. We see negligent discharges all the time. It is preventable, and it can be deadly, a disaster, criminal charges, right? A whole slew of consequences. So be sure to be a responsible gun owner if you do decide to carry a firearm. But let's jump into the clip and we'll analyze it.
Yeah, so I think in this clip we see him getting on the subway, and we see these three men start to tease a woman on the subway. And then eventually Arthur starts laughing and they turn their attention to him.
And the woman walks out.
We got a kicker, huh?
Hold him steady, hold him steady. Stay down, freak.
Stay clear of the closing doors.
So I think we'll cut it off there. Basically what happens from there is Arthur just brutally murders that guy, unfortunately, and shoots him a few more times. But really, in this clip, I think we have another case of good self-defense at first, and then it goes awry after that.
Absolutely. So we look to reasonableness, right? He is in the train car alone with 3 other individuals who are absolutely beating him up, right? We see 3 aggressors brutally attacking him where he's in imminent danger of grave physical injury or death. Absolutely, right? He can definitely, I would say, argue at least that he can pull out a firearm and shoot at that point. There's nobody in the train car that can call authorities or kind of intervene to a point, right? So he shoots the first shot. I would say that is a just shoot, a good shoot. Even the second shot, I don't see the second guy backing up, right? He kind of like stops for a minute, but I do think that would be still a good shoot. And then at that point, when the guy runs, you cannot shoot somebody who is fleeing, right? He's not a threat anymore, even though you're mad, even though the adrenaline's pumping, right? Once somebody is fleeing, they're not a danger to you anymore. Now, if they turn around and come back at you, that's a different story, but that's not what happened here.
I absolutely agree. There was definitely an imminency here. The 3 men against 1. Clearly, he wasn't able to defend himself with just his arms at that point. He did pull out the gun. I think definitely good shoot initially. I think the part we need to talk about is once he exits the train. Here's where it gets bad for him. If he had ended it there on the train where the threat had ceased, the men had left, and everything was good, perfect. However, he chooses to then follow them off the train and continue to shoot, specifically the one man that you see running away and heading for the stairs to exit the subway. Huge issue there because there's no longer a threat to his safety, and this is not going to be justified.
Because even that first shot while that third guy is running away while he's still on the train, as a defense attorney, I don't love it, but I feel like I could sell it saying maybe he thought the guy was going for a weapon himself, or maybe it was just all happened so quickly that it was still in the heat of the moment that he shot the gun. It was still reasonable. Maybe there was a mistake of fact about what that other guy was doing. But as soon as there's that time for Arthur on the train to decompress, he even starts slowly gathering up some items, and then he decides to take a look out of the train and slowly follow this guy as he's limping away. That's a huge problem. This would be one of those clips that if we got this as like surveillance footage for one of our clients, we would be so excited at first watching it. Beautiful shoot, beautiful shoot. And then we get to this third guy as he gets off the train. Heart would sink because the way it would be charged, he'd be charged, potentially for all 3 of them. I think we'd be able to get acquittals on the first 2 charges, but that last charge, I think would be near impossible to defend in court.
You're absolutely right. Watching this, you're like, good shoot, and then you just have this sinking feeling where you just want to slouch in your chair and cover your eyes and pretend you didn't see it because it goes completely south for him and makes it really, really difficult for whoever his defense attorney is going to be to continue to argue self-defense at that point.
Absolutely. And just to mention too, Gotham City is supposed to be staged in New York, and so New York is a concealed carry permit state. Don't know if he did have a permit or not, but that could be an additional charge. So even if, so let's just say it was clear self-defense for all of the shoots, it was not, but let's just say in a perfect world, you know, the facts were a little bit different and we could argue self-defense, he would still be on the hook if he did not go through the necessary permits required to have a firearm in that state. So, you know, I know this is a fake movie, but it's important to make sure that you are following all firearm laws, because self-defense is only a defense to certain charges. You can't use self-defense for, you know, not having a permit when you're supposed to.
Yeah, kind of in the same way if you're not allowed to have a firearm because you're a prohibited possessor. If you have a felony on your record, you could be adding a misconduct involving weapons charge onto your record. So just like you said, even if you're the Joker, you still need a concealed carry permit in New York. So I think that takes us to our last Halloween safety tip here. Emma had a great Halloween safety tip about toy and prop guns.
Yeah, I think it's really important to bring this up. A lot of people, when you're putting together your Halloween costume, sometimes want to incorporate a toy gun, some type of sword or knife, all of which can be fun, but you have to be safe about it. There has been time and time again in the news fun nights that went completely south due to prop weapons. And it's important because, as you mentioned earlier in the first tip, reasonable mistake of fact. Let's chat about what that is just briefly here, especially when it's related to prop weapons. If a person reasonably interprets that you have a weapon on you and you are trying to use that against them to harm them, even if that person is wrong in their belief, they are mistaken, they can still act in self-defense. And that can be for a person on the street, it can be a police officer, and they will be completely justified in using self-defense against you. So you don't want to find yourself in a situation, one, where whatever you're carrying could be mistaken for a real weapon, and two, be smart with how you're using it. Don't be waving it around or threatening anybody with it. Don't find yourself in a situation where, even if you are doing a prank like was mentioned before, or even find yourself in a heated situation, you never want someone to mistake what you have as a real deadly weapon.
Mm-hmm. And I know like having a realistic costume is really fun, and there are some realistic prop weapons out there, or toy firearms. What's really important is a lot of firearms, when they're sold as toys, they have that little orange cap painted on them. That's important. A lot of people choose to paint over that to make it look more realistic. Don't do that. Don't take the one thing that shows this is a toy weapon away from you, putting yourself in more danger from another person or maybe an officer. Keep the toy how it is. And honestly, on Halloween, maybe the more unrealistic the toy looks, the better for your safety. So don't try to go for too much realism. And like Emma said, if you have a realistic weapon or a realistic toy, be very careful with how you use it. If you're waving around your realistic toy, then someone might think you have a real firearm and are threatening them.
Absolutely. Halloween is fun, but be careful.
Well, thank you for tuning in to our first ever Halloween special. If you enjoyed it, please let us know in the comments below. If you hated it, we'll never do it again. Don't worry. So feel free to check us out at attorneysforfreedom.com. That's where you can learn all about our law firm, get to know the attorneys on staff, and get to learn about what kind of cases we handle. You can also check us out on attorneysonretainer.us. Attorneys on Retainer is a self-defense protection program. Be sure to check it out, meet our team, meet our experts, and see how you can become a member today.
If you enjoyed this video, like, comment, subscribe, and share with all your friends and potential new AOR members.
Happy Halloween, and tune in for next month's 2A Roundup. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.